Hey, good girl. 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 Hey, good girl.
Oh, you didn't know? Your ass better call somebody!
Yo. 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 So yeah, the candlelight didn't come out quite how I wanted it, but it's on. I mean, I can move them a little bit, I think, too. We can, maybe try to get some in the front. Oh, that's a little better. That's a little better. Welcome back, guys. Reading stream part 4. Probably of part 6. Probably got this one in 2 more weeks. If you guys noticed, we did a tag for the announcements. If you have signed up for the announcements role, you got a ping. And if you didn't, then under the Discord reading stream section, there is the vote for the next book. I'm going to run that for probably 10 days, maybe a little bit more. Put in your vote. There is a current leader. I'm sure you guys will end up tying it by the end because you are a bunch of rascals. The books are The Adventures of Tom Sawyer, A Study in Scarlet. That's the first Sherlock Holmes book. The Scarlet Letter by Nathaniel Hawthorne, and the Wonderful Wizard of Oz, which is the first of a number of book series in the Wizard of Oz. We are on a Super Boss map. We will not get to the Super Boss tonight unless we stream like way longer than I should. We'll get to it offline tomorrow, like we normally do. It's offline during the day tomorrow. We'll have a Super Boss that will tag the battle command, the battle roll, if you've signed up for that in the Discord for the offline battles. Yeah, I don't know, like if I put on lights, if the candles wouldn't be so strong, or if I have to move them a little bit. I don't know. It's got a very hellish appearance. It's all right, that mutes it a little bit. So we're gonna get rock and rolling, guys. We're gonna get rock and rolling. If you guys want to get into the marbles, do a play, ! Play. I am putting 90 seconds on the clock. We're doing a half-hour map. It's a new one. We haven't done this one before. If you remember, we went hunting last episode. We did a lot of different things. There was the natives that got all restless on the island that our crew members who were hostage went hunting on. They got some actual land meat and land, the breadfruit and coconuts and things that they had missed from their sea diet. There was a crew death, and we went to the underground burial ground that they had. And Nemo didn't want anybody to know where that was located, so the crew was... Oh, Shadow, thank you for gifting that. Like I said, most of the things are off. I am blessed this day. Thank you so much, Shadow. Gifting to the fam. Welcome to the emote community, Blossomberry. There is only 2 sound commands working. It is the marbles call, which we'll do every half hour, and the raid message. Everything else will get turned on afterwards. I thought about leaving the raid message off too, but we do want to welcome our friends, and that'll be a pause moment anyways for, if we have raiders coming in, we'll want to pause the reading anyways. The last 3 readings, last 5 readings, but the last 2 from Treasure Island, we did not get all of Treasure Islands onto YouTube in time before they were gone. They're gone for good. I'd have to reread them. But the first 3 that we have done of Jules Verne are on YouTube now. Oh, yeah. But that's not a command that will... Yes. Yeah, good point. Yes, we also have the horn for Stream Raiders. But the first 3 videos for Jules Verne's 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea have been put onto YouTube, and I did clip off the back half where we start doing a little gaming for an hour or so afterwards, which is what we'll do again tonight. We're going to get ourselves about halfway, if not, actually probably 2/3 of the way to the Super Boss tonight. So let's just go ahead and get into it, guys. We are on Chapter 2, Part 2 of the book. And we are just over halfway. I mean, literally just over halfway through the book. So let's get into it. We're going to read for about 2 hours. Apologize for being a little bit late. Everything's just been running late today. And we've been having a crap ton of teams at my Tuesday gig. And that gig just keeps getting longer and longer for the trivia night. Which is a great thing for everybody involved, but it's harder for me to get out of there on time. All right. Oh, good Lord. Let me mute that phone. All right. Now there is my other phone, which is my work phone, which if that goes off, I gotta answer it. So. Jules Verne, 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, Part 2, Chapter 2. A novel proposal of Captain Nemo's. On the 28th of February, when at noon the Nautilus came to the surface of the sea, in 9 degrees 4 minutes north latitude, there was land in sight about 8 miles to westward. The first thing I noticed was a range of mountains about 2,000 feet high, the shapes of which were the most capricious. On taking the bearings, I knew that we were nearing the island of Ceylon, the pearl which hangs from the lobe of the Indian peninsula. Captain Nemo and his second appeared at this moment. The captain glanced at the map, then turning to me said, "The island of Ceylon, noted for its pearl fisheries. Would you like to visit one of them, Monsieur Ahana?" "Certainly, Captain." "Well, the thing is easy, though if we see the fisheries, we shall not see the fishermen. The annual exportation has not yet begun. Never mind. I will give orders to make for the Gulf of Manar, where we shall arrive in the night. The captain said something to his second, who immediately went out. Soon the Nautilus returned to her native element, and the manometer showed that she was about 30 feet deep. Well, sir, said Captain Nemo, you and your companions shall visit the bank of Manar, and if by chance some fisherman shall be there, we shall see him at work. Agreed, Captain. By the by, Monsieur Ahana, you are not afraid of sharks? Sharks? Exclaimed I. The question seemed a very hard one. Well, continued Captain Nemo, I admit, Captain, that I am not yet very familiar with that kind of fish. We are all accustomed to them, replied Captain Nemo. And in time you will be too. However, we shall be armed, and on the road we may be able to hunt some of the tribe. It is interesting, so till tomorrow, sir, and early. This said in a careless tone, Captain Nemo left the saloon. Now, if you were invited to hunt the bear in the mountains of Switzerland, what would you say? Very well, tomorrow we will go and hunt the bear. Now, if you were asked to hunt the lion in the plains of Atlas, or the tiger in the Indian jungles, what would you say? Ha ha, it seems we are going to hunt the tiger or the lion. But when you are invited to hunt the shark in its natural element, you would perhaps reflect before accepting the invitation. As for myself, I passed my hand over my forehead, on which stood large drops of cold perspiration. Let us reflect, said I, and take our time. Hunting otters in submarine forests, as we did in the island of Crespo, will pass, but going up and down at the bottom of the sea, where one is almost certain to meet sharks, is quite another thing. I know well that in certain countries, particularly in the Andaman Islands, the Negroes never hesitate to attack them with a dagger in one hand and a running noose in the other, but I also know that a few who affront those creatures ever return alive. However, I am not a Negro, and if I were, I think a little hesitation in this case were not ill-timed. A quick break to remind you how old this book, and we are reading it verbatim. At this moment, Conseil and the Canadian entered. Quite composed and even joyous, they knew not what awaited them. Faith, sir, said Ned Land, your Captain Nemo, the devil take him, has just made us a very pleasant offer. Ah, said I, you know. It is agreeable to you, sir, interrupted Conseil. The commander of the Nautilus has invited us to visit the magnificent Ceylon fisheries tomorrow in your company. He did it kindly and behaved like a real gentleman. He said nothing more? Nothing more, sir, except that he had already spoken to you of this little walk. Sir, said Conseil, would you give us details of the pearl fishery? As to the fishing itself, I asked, or the incidents which? On the fishing, replied the Canadian. Before entering upon the ground, it is as well to know something about it. Very well. Sit down, my friends, and I will teach you. Ned and Conseil seated themselves on an ottoman, and the first thing the Canadian asked was, Sir, what is a pearl? My worthy Ned, I answered, to the poet, a pearl is the tear of the sea. To the Orientals, it is a drop of dew solidified. To the ladies, it is a jewel of an oblong shape, of a brilliancy of mother-of-pearl substance, which they wear on their fingers, necks, and their ears. For the chemist, it is a mixture of phosphate and carbonate of lime, with a little gelatin, and lastly, for naturalists, it is simply a morbid secretion of the organ that produces the mother-of-pearl amongst certain bivalves. Branch of mollusks, said Conseil. Precisely so, my learned Conseil. And amongst these testicae, the ear shell, the turdacne, the turbos, in a word, all of these which secrete mother-of-pearl, that is, the blue, bluish, violet, or white substance which lines the interior of their shells, are capable of producing pearls. Mussels, too? Asked the Canadian. Yes, mussels of certain waters, in Scotland, Wales, Ireland, Saxony, Bohemia, and France. Good. For the future I shall pay attention, replied the Canadian. But, I continued, the particular mollusk which secretes the pearl is the pearl oyster, the Meleagrina margaritifruct, that precious pintadine. The pearl is nothing but a nacreous formation, deposited in a globular form, either adhering to the oyster shell or buried in the folds of the creature. On the shell it is fast, in the flesh it is loosed, but always has for a kernel a small hard substance, maybe a barren egg, maybe a grain of sand, around which the pearly matter deposits itself year after year successively and by thin concentric layers. Are many pearls found in the same oyster? Asked Conseil. Yes, my boy. Some are a perfect casket. One oyster has been mentioned, though I allow myself to doubt it, as having contained no less than 150 sharks.
150 sharks!
Exclaimed Ned Land. Did I say sharks? Said I hurriedly. I meant to say 150 pearls. Sharks would not be sense. Certainly not, said Conseil. But will you tell us now what you mean by extract these pearls? They proceed in various ways. When they adhere to the shell, the fisherman often pulls them off with pincers, but the most common way is to lay the oysters on mats of the seaweed which cover the banks. Thus they die in the open air, and at the end of 10 days they are in a forward state of decomposition. They are then plunged into large reservoirs of seawater. Then they are opened and washed. The price of these pearls varies according to their size? Asked Conseil. Not only according to their size, I answered, but also according to their shape, their water, that is their color, and their luster, that is the bright and diapered sparkle which makes them so charming to the eye. The most beautiful are called virgin pearls, or paragons. They are formed alone in the tissue of the mollusk, and are white, often opaque, and sometimes they have the transparency of an opal, generally round or oval. The round are made into bracelets, the oval into pendants, and, being more precious, are sold singly. Those adhering to the shell of the oyster are more irregular in shape and are sold by weight. Lastly, in a low order are classed those small pearls known under the name of seed pearls. They are sold by measure and are especially used in embroidery for church ornaments. But, said Conseil, is this pearl fishery dangerous? No, I answered quickly, particularly if certain precautions are taken.
What does one risk in such a calling? Said Ned Land. The swallowing of some mouthfuls of seawater?
As you say, Ned, by the by, said I, trying to take Captain Nemo's careless tone. Are you afraid of sharks, brave Ned?
I, replied the Canadian, a harpooner by profession? It is my trade to make light of them.
But, said I, it is not a question of fishing for them with an iron swivel, hoisting them into the vessel, cutting off their tails with the blow of a chopper, ripping them up, and throwing their hearts into the sea.
Then it is a question of...
Precisely.
In the water.
In the water.
Faith, with a good harpoon, you know, sir, these sharks are ill-fashioned beasts. They turn on their bellies to seize you, and in that time...
Ned Land had a way of saying seize, which made my blood run cold. Well, and you, Conseil, what do you think of sharks? Me, said Conseil. I'll be frank, sir. So much the better, thought I. If you, sir, me to face the sharks, I do not see why your faithful servant should not face them with you. End of chapter 2.
I'm going to run the Stream Raiders battle silently because it's going to be ready in 40 seconds. So we'll have a new one up. You'll see the alerts in chat. Chapter 3, A Pearl of 10 Millions. The next morning at 4 o'clock, I was awakened by the steward, whom Captain Nemo had placed at my service. I rose hurriedly, dressed, and went into the saloon. Captain Nemo was awaiting me.
Monsieur Ohana, said he, are you ready to start?
I am ready.
Then please to follow me.
And my companions, Captain?
They have been told and are waiting.
Are we not to put on our divers' dresses? Asked I.
Not yet. I have not allowed the Nautilus to come too near this coast, and we are some distance from the Manar Bank. but the boat is ready and will take us to the exact point of disembarking, which will save us a long way. It carries our diving apparatus, and we will put on when we begin our submarine journey.
Captain Nemo conducted me to the central staircase, which led on the platform. Ned and Conseil were already there, delighted at the idea of the pleasure party, which was preparing. 5 sailors from the Nautilus, with their oars, waited in the boat, which had been made fast against the side. The night was still dark, layers of clouds covering the sky, allowing but a few stars to be seen. I looked on the side where the land lay and saw nothing but a dark line enclosing 3 parts of the horizon, from southwest to northwest. The Nautilus, having returned during the night up the western Gulf of Ceylon, was now west of the bay, or rather gulf, formed by the mainland of the island of Manar. There, under the dark waters stretched by the Pintadine Bank, an inexhaustible field of pearls, the length of which is more than 20 miles. Captain Nemo, Ned Land, Conseil, and I took our places in the stern of the boat. The master went to the tiller. His 4 companions leaned on their oars. The painter was cast off, and we sheered off.
The boat went towards the south. The oarsmen did not hurry. I noticed that their strokes, strong in the water, only followed each other every 10 seconds, according to the method generally adopted in the Navy. Whilst the craft was running by its own velocity, the liquid drops struck the dark depths of the wave crispy like spats of melted lead. A little billow, spreading wide, gave a slight roll to the boat, and some samphire reeds flapped before it. We were silent. What was Captain Nemo thinking of? Perhaps of the land he was approaching, and which he found too near to him, contrary to the Canadians' opinion, who thought it too far off. As to Conseil, he was merely there from curiosity. About 5:30, the first tints on the horizon showed the upper line of coast more distinctly. Flat enough in the east, it rose a little to the south. 5 miles still lay between us, and it was indistinct owing to the mist of the water. At 6 o'clock, it became suddenly daylight with that rapidity peculiar to tropical regions, which know neither dawn nor twilight. The solar rays pierced the curtain of clouds, piled up on the eastern horizon, and the radiant orb rose rapidly. I saw land distinctly, with a few trees scattered here and there. The boat neared Manar Island, which was rounded to the south. Captain Nemo rose from his seat and watched the sea. At a sign from him, the anchor was dropped, but the chain scarcely ran, for it was little more than a yard deep, and this spot was one of the highest points of the bank of Pintadines. "Here we are, Monsieur Ahana," said Captain Nemo. "You see that enclosed bay? Here in a month will be assembled the numerous fishing boats of the exporters, and these are the waters their divers will ransack so boldly. Happily, this bay is well suited for that kind of fishing. It is sheltered from the strongest winds. The sea is never very rough here, which makes it favorable for the divers' work. We will now put on our dresses and begin our walk."
I did not answer, and while watching the suspected waves, began with the help of the sailors to put on my heavy sea dress. Captain Nemo and my companions were also dressing. None of the Nautilus men were to accompany us on this new excursion. Soon we were enveloped to the throat in India rubber clothing, the air apparatus fixed to our backs by braces, and as to the Ruhmkorff apparatus, there was no necessity for it. Before putting my head into the copper cap, I had asked the question of the captain.
"They will be useless," he replied. "We are going to no great depth, and the solar rays will be enough to light our walk. Besides, it would not be prudent to carry the electric light in these waters. Its brilliancy might attract some of the dangerous inhabitants of the coast, most inopportunely."
As Captain Nemo pronounced these words, I turned to Conseil and Ned Land, but my two friends had already encased their heads in the metal cap, and they could neither hear nor answer. One last question remained to ask of Captain Nemo. "And our arms, S.I.? Our guns?"
Guns? What for? Do not mountaineers attack the bear with a dagger in their hand? And is not steel surer than lead? Here is a strong blade. Put it in your belt and we start."
I looked at my companions. They were armed like us. And more than that, Ned Land was brandishing an enormous harpoon, which he had placed in the boat before leaving the Nautilus. Then, following the captain's example, I allowed myself to be dressed in the heavy copper helmet. And our reservoirs of air were at once in activity. An instant after we landed, one after the other, in about 2 yards of water upon an even sand, Captain Nemo made a sign with his hand, and we followed him by a gentle declivity till we disappeared under the waves. Over our feet, like conveys of snipe in a bog, rose shells of fish, the genus Monoptera, which have no fins but their tail. I recognized the Havanese, a real serpent 2.5 feet long of a livid color underneath, and which might easily be mistaken for a conger eel if it were not for the golden stripes on its side. And the genus Stromateus, whose bodies are very flat and oval. I saw some of the most brilliant colors, carrying their dorsal fin like a sight. An excellent eating fish, which, dried and pickled, is known by the name of carawade. Then some tranquilbars, belonging to the genus Apsiphoroids, whose body is covered with the shell cuirass of 8 longitudinal planes. The heightening sun lit the massive waters more and more. The soil changed by degrees. To the fine sand succeeded a perfect causeway of boulders covered with a red carpet of mollusks and zoophytes. Amongst the specimens of these branches I noticed some placinae with thin, unequal shells, a kind of ostration peculiar to the Red Sea and the Indian Ocean. Some orange lucinae with rounded shells. Rockfish 3.5 feet long, which raised themselves under the waves like hands ready to seize one. There were also some perpires, slightly luminous, and lastly some oculines, like magnificent fans, forming one of the richest vegetations of these seas. In the midst of these living plants and under the arbors of the hydrophytes were layers of clumsy articulates, particularly some rheinae, whose carapace formed a slightly rounded triangle, and some horrible-looking parthenopes. At about 7 o'clock we found ourselves at last surveying the oyster banks on which the pearl oysters are reproduced by millions. Captain Nemo pointed with his hand to this enormous heap of oysters, and I could well understand that this mine was inexhaustible, for nature's creative power is far beyond man's instinct of destruction. Ned Land, faithful to his instinct, hastened to fill a net which he carried by his side with some of the finest specimens. But we could not stop. We must follow the captain, who seemed to guide himself by paths known only to himself. The ground was sensibly rising, and sometimes, on holding up my arm, it was above the surface of the sea. Then the level of the bank would sink capriciously. Often we rounded high rocks scarped into pyramids. In their dark fractures, huge crustacea, perched upon their high claws like some war machine, watched us with fixed eyes, and under our feet crawled various kinds of annelids. At this moment there opened before us a large grotto dug into a picturesque heap of rocks and carpeted with all the thick warp of the submarine flora. At first it seemed very dark to me. The solar rays seemed to be extinguished by successive gradations until its vague transparency became nothing more than drowned light. Captain Nemo entered, we followed. My eyes soon accustomed themselves to the relative state of darkness. I could distinguish the arches springing capriciously from natural pillars, standing broad upon their granite base, like the heavy columns of Tuscan architecture. Why had our incomprehensible guide led us to the bottom of this submarine crypt? I was soon to know. After descending a rather sharp declivity, our feet trod the bottom of a kind of circular pit. There Captain Nemo stopped, and with his hand indicated an object I had not yet perceived.
It was an oyster of extraordinary dimensions, a gigantic tridacne, a goblet which would have contained a whole lake of holy water, a basin the breadth of which was more than 2.5 yards, and consequently larger than the ornamenting the saloon of the Nautilus. I approached the extraordinary mollusk. I adhered by its filaments to a table of granite, and there, isolated, it developed itself in the calm waters of the grotto. I estimated the weight of this tridacne at 600 pounds. Such an oyster could contain 30 pounds of meat, and one must have the stomach of a gargantua to demolish some dozens of them. Captain Nemo was evidently acquainted with the existence of this bivalve and seemed to have a particular motive in verifying the actual state of this tridacne. The shells were a little open, and Captain came near and put his dagger between to prevent them from closing, and then with his hand he raised the membrane with its fringed edges, which formed a cloak for the creature. There, between the folded plates, I saw a loose pearl, whose size equaled that of a coconut. Its globular shape, perfect clearness, and admirable luster made it altogether a jewel of inestimable value. Carried away by my curiosity, I stretched out my hand to seize it, weigh it, and touch it, but the captain stopped me, made a sign of a refusal, and quickly withdrew his dagger, and the two shells closed suddenly. I then understood Captain Nemo's intention. In leaving this pearl hidden in the mantle of the tridacne, he was allowing it to grow slowly. Each year, the secretions of the mollusk would add new concentric circles. I estimated its value at 500,000 pounds at least. At 10 minutes, Captain Nemo stopped suddenly. I thought he had halted previously to returning. No, by a gesture, he bade us crouch beside him in a deep fracture of the rock. His hand pointed to one part of the liquid mass, which I watched attentively. About 5 yards from me, a shadow appeared and sank to the ground. This disquieting idea of sharks shot through my head, but I was mistaken, and once again, it was not a monster of the ocean that we had anything to do with. It was a man, a living man, an Indian, a fisherman, a poor devil who, I suppose, had come to glean before the harvest. I could see the bottom of his canoe anchored some feet above his head. He dived and went up successively. A stone held between his feet, cut in the shape of a sugar loaf, while a rope fastened him to his boat and helped him to descend more rapidly. This was all his apparatus. Reaching the bottom about 5 yards deep, he went up to his knees, filled his bag with oysters picked at random, and then he went up, emptied it, pulled up his stone, and began the operation once more, which lasted 30 seconds. The diver did not see us. The shadow of the rock hid us from sight. And how should this poor Indian ever dream that men, beings like himself, should be there under the water, watching his movements and losing no detail of the fishing? Several times he went up in this way and dived again. He did not carry away more than 10 at each plunge, for he was obliged to pull them from the bank, to which they were adhered by means of the strong byssus. And how many of those oysters for which he risked his life had no pearl in them? I watched him closely. His maneuvers were regular, and for the space of half an hour no danger appeared to threaten him. I was beginning to accustom myself to the sight of this interesting fishing, when suddenly, as the Indian was on the ground, I saw him make a gesture of terror, rise, and make a spring to return to the surface of the sea. I understood his dread. A gigantic shadow appeared just above the unfortunate diver, a shark of enormous size, advancing diagonally, his eyes on fire and his jaws open. I was mute with horror and unable to move. The voracious creature shot towards the Indian, who threw himself on one side to avoid the shark's fins, but not its tail, for it struck his chest and stretched him on the ground. The scene lasted but a few seconds. The shark returned, and turning on his back, prepared himself for cutting the Indian in two, when I saw Captain Nemo rise suddenly, and then, dagger in hand, walk straight to the monster, ready to fight face to face with him. The very moment the shark was going to snap the unhappy fisherman in two, he perceived his new adversary and, turning over, made straight towards him. I can still see Captain Nemo's position. Holding himself well together, he waited for the shark with admirable coolness, and when it rushed at him, threw himself to one side with wonderful quickness, avoided the shock, and burying his dagger deep into its side. But it was not all over. A terrible combat ensued.
The shark had seemed to roar, if I might say so. The blood rushed in torrents from its wound. The sea was dyed red, and through the opaque liquid I could distinguish nothing more, until the moment when, like lightning, I saw the undaunted captain holding onto one of the creature's fins, struggling, as it were, hand to hand with the monster and dealing successful blows as his enemy, yet still unable to give a decisive one. The shark's struggles agitated the water with such fury that the rocking threatened to upset me. I wanted to go to the captain's assistance, but nailed to the spot with horror, I could not stir. I saw the haggard eye. I saw the different phases of the fight. The captain fell to the earth, upset by the enormous match which leant upon him. The shark's jaws opened wide like a pair of factory shears, and it would have been all over for the captain, but, quick as thought, harpoon in hand, Ned Land rushed towards the shark and struck it with its sharp point. The waves were impregnated with a mass of blood. They rocked under the shark's movements, which beat them with indescribable fury. Ned Land had not missed his aim. It was the monster's death rattle. Struck to the heart, it struggled in dreadful convulsions, the shock of which overthrew Conseil. But Ned Land had disentangled the captain, who, getting up without any wound, went straight to the Indian, quickly cut the cord which held him to his stone, took him in his arms, and, with a sharp blow of his heel, mounted to the surface. We all three followed in a few seconds, saved by a miracle, and reached the fisherman's boat. Captain Nemo's first care was to recall the unfortunate man to life again. I did not think he could succeed. I hoped so, for the poor creature's immersion was not long, but the blow from the shark's tail might have been his death blow. Happily, with the captain's and Conseil's sharp friction, I saw consciousness return by degrees. He opened his eyes. What was his surprise, his terror even, at seeing 4 great copperheads leaning above him. Above all, what must have thought when Captain Nemo, drawing from the pocket of his dress a bag of pearls, placed it in his hand. The munificent charity from the man of the waters to the poor Singhalese was accepted with a trembling hand. His wandering eyes showed that he knew not to what superhuman beings he owed both his fortune and life. At a sign from the captain, we regained the bank, and, following the road already traversed, came in about half an hour to the anchor which held the canoe of the Nautilus to the earth. Once on board, we each, with the help of the sailors, got rid of the heavy copper helmet. Captain Nemo's first word was to the Canadian.
"Thank you, Master Land," said he. "It was in revenge, Captain," replied Ned Land. "I owed you that."
A ghastly smile passed across the captain's lips, and that was all.
"To the Nautilus," said he.
The boat flew over the waves some minutes after we met the shark's dead body floating. By the black marking of the extremity of its fin, I recognized the terrible Melanopateran of the Indian seas, of the species of shark so properly called. It was more than 25 feet long. An enormous mouth occupied 1/3 of its body. It was an adult, and was known by its 6 rows of teeth placed in an isosceles triangle in the upper jaw. While I was contemplating this inert mass, a dozen of these voracious beasts appeared around the boat, and without noticing us, threw themselves upon the dead body and fought with one another for the pieces. At 8:30, we were again on board the Nautilus. There, I reflected on the incidents which had taken place in our excursion to the Manar Bank. 2 conclusions I must inevitably draw from it. One, bearing upon the unparalleled courage of Captain Nemo. The other, upon his devotion to a human being, representative of that race from which he fled beneath the sea. Whatever he might say, this strange man had not yet succeeded in entirely crushing his heart. When I made this observation to him, he answered in a slightly moved tone.
"That Indian, sir, is an inhabitant of an oppressed country, and I am still, and shall be, to my last breath, one of them."
End of chapter 3. Chapter 4. The Red Sea. In the course of the day of the 29th of January, the island of Ceylon disappeared under the horizon, and the Nautilus, at a speed of 20 miles an hour, slid into the labyrinth of canals which separated the Maldives from the Laccadives. It coasted even the island of Kiltan, a land originally coralline, discovered by Vasco da Gama in 1499, and one of the 19 principal islands of the Laccadive archipelago, situated between 10 degrees and 14 degrees 30 minutes north latitude and 69 degrees 50 minutes 72 east longitude. We had made 16,220 miles, or 7,500 French leagues, from our starting point in the Japanese seas. The next day, the 30th of January, when the Nautilus went to the surface of the ocean, there was no land in sight. Its course, north-northeast in the direction of the Sea of Oman between Arabia and the Indian Peninsula, which serves as an outlet to the Persian Gulf. It was evidently a block without any possible egress. Where was Captain Nemo taking us to? I could not say. This, however, did not satisfy the Canadian, who that day came to me asking where we were going. We are going where our captain's fancy takes us, Master Ned.
His fancy cannot take us far, then, said the Canadian. The Persian Gulf has no outlet, and if we do go in, it will not be long before we are out again.
Very well, then. We will come out again, Master Land, and if, after the Persian Gulf, the Nautilus would like to visit the Red Sea, the Straits of Bab el-Mandab, and there give us entrance.
I need not tell you, sir, said Ned Land, that the Red Sea is as much closed as the Gulf, as the Isthmus of Suez is not yet cut, and if it was, a boat as mysterious as ours would not risk itself in a canal cut with sluices. And again, the Red Sea is not the road to take us back to Europe.
But I never said we were going back to Europe.
What do you suppose, then?
I suppose that, after visiting the curious coasts of Arabia and Egypt, the Nautilus will go down the Indian Ocean again, perhaps cross the Channel of Mozambique, perhaps off the Mascarenhas, so as to gain the Cape of Good Hope.
And once at the Cape of Good Hope?
Asked the Canadian with peculiar emphasis. Well, we shall penetrate into that Atlantic which we do not yet know. Ah, friend Ned, you are getting tired of this journey under the sea. You are surfeited with an incessantly varying spectacle of submarine wonders. For my part, I shall be sorry to see the end of a voyage which it is given to so few men to make. For 4 days, till the 3rd of February, the Nautilus scoured the Sea of Oman at various speeds and various depths. It seemed to go at random, as if hesitating as to which road it should follow, but we never passed the Tropic of Cancer. In quitting this sea, we sighted Muscat for an instant, one of the most important towns of the country of Oman. I admired its strange aspect, surrounded by black rocks upon which its white houses and forts stood in relief. I saw the rounded domes of its mosques, the elegant points of its minarets, its fresh and verdant terraces, but it was only a vision. The Nautilus soon sank under the waves of that part of the sea. We passed along the Arabian coasts of Ma'ara and Hadramaut for a distance of 6 miles, its undulating line of mountains being occasionally relieved by some ancient ruin. The 5th of February, we were at last entered the Gulf of Aden, a perfect funnel introduced into the neck of Bab el-Mandab, through which the Indian waters entered the Red Sea. The 6th of February, the Nautilus floated in sight of Aden, perched upon the promontory which a narrow isthmus joins to the mainland, a kind of inaccessible Gibraltar, the fortifications of which were rebuilt by the English after taking possession in 1839. I caught a glimpse of the octagon minarets of this town, which was at one time the richest commercial magazine on the coast. I certainly thought that Captain Nemo, arrived at this point, would back out again, but I was mistaken, for he did no such thing, much to my surprise. The next day, the 7th of February, we entered the Straits of Bab el-Mandeb, the name of which in the Arab tongue means the Gate of Tears. To 20 miles in breadth, it is only 32 in length, and for the Nautilus, starting at full speed, the crossing was scarcely the work of an hour. But I saw nothing, not even the island of Perim, with which the British government had fortified the position of Aden. There were too many English or French steamers of the line of Suez to Bombay, Calcutta to Melbourne, and from Bourbon to the Mauritius, furrowing this narrow passage for the Nautilus to venture to show itself, so it remained prudently below. At last, about noon, we were in the waters of the Red Sea. I would not even seek to understand the caprice which had decided Captain Nemo upon entering the Gulf, but I quite approved of the Nautilus entering it. Its speed was lessened. Sometimes it kept on the surface, sometimes it dived to avoid a vessel, and thus I was able to observe the upper and lower parts of this curious sea. The 8th of February, from the first dawn of day, Mocha came in sight, now a ruined town, whose walls would fall at a gunshot, yet which shelters here and there some verdant date trees. Once an important city, containing 6 public markets and 26 mosques, and whose walls, defended by 14 forts, formed a girdle of 2 miles in circumference. The Nautilus then approached the African shore, where the depth of the water was greater. There, between 2 waters clear as crystal, through the open panels we were allowed to contemplate the beautiful bushes of brilliant coral and large blocks of rock, clothed with a splendid fur of green variety of sights and landscapes along these sandbanks and algae and fuci. What an indescribable spectacle, and what variety of sights and landscapes along these sandbanks and volcanic islands were bound the Libyan coast. But where those shrubs appeared in all their beauty was on the eastern coast, which the Nautilus soon gained. It was on the coast of Tahama, for there not only did the display of zoophytes flourish under the level of the sea, but they also formed picturesque interlacings which unfolded themselves about 60 feet above the surface, more capricious but less highly colored than those whose freshness was kept up by the vital power of the waters. What charming hours I had passed at the window of the saloon! What new specimens of submarine flora and fauna did I admire under the brightness of our electric lantern! The 9th of February, the Nautilus floated in the broadest part of the Red Sea, which is comprised between Sawakin on the west coast and Confida on the east coast, with a diameter of 90 miles. That day at noon, after the bearings were taken, Captain Nemo mounted the platform where I happened to be, and I was determined not to let him go down again without at least pressing him regarding his ulterior projects. As soon as he saw me, he approached and graciously offered me a cigar. "Well, sir, does this Red Sea please you? Have I sufficiently observed the wonders it covers, its fishes, its zoophytes, its parterres of sponges, and its forests of coral? Did you catch a glimpse of the towns on its borders?" "Yes, Captain Nemo," I replied, "and the Nautilus is wonderfully fitted for such a study. It's an intelligent boat." "Yes, sir. Intelligent and invulnerable. It fears neither the terrible tempests of the Red Sea, nor its currents, nor its sandbanks." "Certainly," said I. "The sea is quoted as one of the worst, and in the time of the ancients, if I am not mistaken, its reputation was detestable." "Detestable, Monsieur Arhal. The Greek and Latin historians do not speak favorably of it, and Strabo says it's very dangerous during the Estian winds and in the rainy season. The Arabian Edrisi portrays it under the name of the Gulf of Khalzoum, and relates that vessels perished there in great numbers on the sandbanks, and that no one would risk sailing in the night. It is, he pretends, a sea subject to fearful hurricanes, strewn with inhospitable islands, and which offers nothing good either on its surface or in its depths." "One may see," I replied, "that these historians never sailed on board the Nautilus." "Just so," replied the captain, smiling. "And in that respect, moderns are not more advanced than the Asians. It required many ages to find out the mechanical power of steam. Who knows if, in another 100 years, we may not see a second Nautilus? Progress is slow, Monsieur Ahana." "It is true," I answered. "Your boat is at least a century before its time, perhaps an era. What a misfortune that the secret of such an invention should die with its inventor." Captain Nemo did not reply. After some minutes' silence, he continued. "You were speaking of the opinions of ancient historians upon the dangerous navigation of the Red Sea." "It is true," said I. "But were not their fears exaggerated?"
Yes and no, Monsieur Ahana, replied Captain Nemo, who seemed to know the Red Sea by heart. That which is no longer dangerous for a modern vessel, well rigged, strongly built, and master of its own course thanks to obedient steam, offered all sorts of perils to the ships of the ancients. Picture to yourself those first navigators wintering in ships made of planks, sewn with the cords of the palm tree, saturated with the grease of the sea dog, and covered with powdered resin. They had not even instruments wherewith to take their bearings, and they went by guess amongst the currents, of which they scarcely knew anything. Under such conditions shipwrecks were, and must have been, numerous. But in our time, steamers running between Suez and the South Seas have nothing more to fear from the fury of this Gulf, in spite of contrary trade winds. The captain and passengers do not prepare for their departure by offering propitiatory sacrifices, and on their return they no longer go ornamented with wreaths and gilt fillets to thank the gods in their neighboring temple.
I agree with you, said I, and steam seems to have killed all gratitude in the hearts of sailors. But, Captain, since you seem to have especially studied the sea, can you tell me the origin of its name?
There exist several explanations on the subject, Monsieur Ahana. Would you like to know the opinion of a chronicle of the 14th century?
Willingly.
This fanciful writer pretends that its name was given to it after the passage of the Israelites, when Pharaoh purchased in the waves which closed at the voice of Moses.
A poet's explanation, Captain Nemo, I replied, but I cannot content myself with that. I ask for your personal opinion.
Here it is, Monsieur Ahana. According to my idea, we must see. According to my idea, we must see in this appellation of the Red Sea a translation of the Hebrew word Edom, and if the ancients gave it that name, it was on account of a particular color of its waters.
But up to this time I have seen nothing but transparent waves and without any particular color.
Very likely, but as we advance to the bottom of the Gulf, you will see this singular appearance. I remember seeing the Bay of Tor entirely red like a sea of blood.
And you attribute this color to the presence of microscopic seaweed?
Yes.
So, Captain Nemo, it is not the first time you have overrun the Red Sea on board the Nautilus?
No, sir.
As you spoke a while ago of the passage of the Israelites and of the catastrophe to the Egyptians, I will ask whether you have met with the traces under the water of this great historical fact.
No, sir, and for good reason.
What is it?
It is that the spot where Moses and his people passed is now so blocked up with sand that the camels can barely bathe their legs there. You can well understand that there would not be water enough for my Nautilus.
And the spot? I asked. And the spot? I asked.
The spot is situated a little above the Isthmus of Suez, in the arm which formerly made a deep estuary when the Red Sea extended to the Salt Lakes. Now, whether this passage were miraculous or not, the Israelites, nevertheless, crossed there to reach the Promised Land, and Pharaoh's army perished precisely on that spot. And I think the excavations made in the middle of the sand will bring light to a large number of arms and instruments of Egyptian origin.
That is evident, I replied, and for the sake of archaeologists, let us hope that these excavations will be made sooner or later, when new towns are established on the isthmus after the construction of the Suez Canal, a canal, however, very useless to a vessel like the Nautilus.
Very likely, but useful to the whole world, said Captain Nemo. The ancients well understood the utility of a communication between the Red Sea and the Mediterranean for their commercial affairs, but they did not think of digging a canal direct and took the Nile as an intermediate. Very probably the canal which united the Nile to the Red Sea was begun by Sesostris, if we may believe tradition. One thing is certain. In the year 615 before Jesus Christ, Necos undertook the works of an elementary canal through the waters of the Nile across the plains of Egypt, looking towards Arabia. It took 4 days to go up this canal, and it was so wide that 2 trimeres could go abreast. It was carried on by Darius, the son of Hystaspes, and probably finished by Ptolemy II. Strabo saw it navigated, but its decline from the point of departure near Bubastis to the Red Sea was so slight that it was only navigable for a few months a year. The canal answered all commercial purposes to the age of Antonius, when it was abandoned and blocked up with sand. Restored by order of Caliph Omar, it was definitely destroyed in 761 or 762 by Caliph al-Mansur, who wished to prevent the arrival of provisions to Muhammad bin Abdallah, who had revolted against him. During the expedition into Egypt, your General Bonaparte discovered traces of the work in the desert of Suez, and surprised by the tide, he nearly perished before regaining Hajorat, at the very place where Moses had encamped 3,000 years before him.
Well, Captain, what the ancients dared not undertake, this junction between the 2 seas, which will shorten the road from Cadiz to India, Monsieur Lesseps has succeeded in doing, and before long he will have changed Africa into an immense island.
Yes, Monsieur Ahana, you have the right to be proud of your countryman. Such a man brings more honor to a nation than great captains. He began like so many others with disgust and rebuffs, but he has triumphed, for he has the genius of will. And it is sad to think a work like that, which ought to have been an international work, and which would have sufficed to make a reign illustrious, should have succeeded by the energy of one man. All honor to Monsieur Lesseps.
Yes, honor to a great citizen, I replied, surprised by the manner in which Captain Nemo had just spoken.
Unfortunately, he continued, I cannot take you through the Suez Canal, but you will be able to see the long jetty of Port Said after tomorrow, when we shall be in the Mediterranean.
The Mediterranean? I exclaimed.
Yes, sir. Does that astonish you?
What astonishes me is to think we shall be there the day after tomorrow.
Indeed?
Yes, Captain, although by this time I ought to have accustomed myself to be surprised at nothing since I have been on board your boat.
But the cause of this surprise?
Well, it is the fearful speed you will have to put on the Nautilus if the day after tomorrow she is to be in the Mediterranean, having made the round of Africa and double the Cape of Good Hope.
Who told you that she would make round of Africa and double the Cape of Good Hope, sir?
Well, unless the Nautilus sails on dry land and passes above the isthmus.
Or beneath it, Monsieur Ahana.
Beneath it?
Certainly, replied Captain Nemo quietly. A long time ago, nature made under this tongue of land what man has this day made on its surface.
What? Such a passage exists?
Yes, a subterranean passage, which I have named the Arabian Tunnel. It takes us beneath Suez and opens into Gulf of Pelusium.
But this isthmus is composed of nothing but quicksands.
To a certain depth, but at 55 yards only, there is a solid layer of rock.
Did you discover this by chance?
I asked, more and more surprised. Chance and reasoning, sir. And by reasoning even more than by chance. Not only does this passage exist, but I have profited by it several times. Without that, I should not have ventured this day into the impassable Red Sea. I noticed that in the Red Sea and in the Mediterranean there exist a number of fishes of a kind perfectly identical. Certain of the fact, I asked myself, was it possible there was no communication between the 2 seas? If there was, the subterranean current must necessarily run from the Red Sea to the Mediterranean. For the sole cause of difference of level, I caught a large number of fishes in the neighborhood of Suez. I passed a copper ring through their tails and threw them back into the sea. Several months later, on the coast of Syria, I caught some of my fish ornamented with the ring. Thus the communication between the two was proved. I then sought for it with the Nautilus. I discovered it, ventured into it, and before long, sir, you too shall have passed through my Arabian tunnel.
End of chapter 4. Chapter 5. The Arabian Tunnel. That same evening, in 21 degrees 30 minutes north latitude, the Nautilus floated on the surface of the sea, approaching the Arabian coast. I saw Jeddah, the most important counting house of Egypt, Syria, Turkey, and India. I distinguished clearly enough of its buildings. The vessel anchored at the quays, and those whose draught of water obliged them to anchor in the roads. The sun, rather low on the horizon, struck full on the houses of the town, bringing out their whiteness. Welcome in, Raiders. We love Snooze Button TV in this house. And I have taken to on my ride home from work trying to listen to you. So I got to hear all about the hockey sweater today, which as an American I know nothing about. But apparently that's a pretty big book in that land. Oh, what's up, Sudoku? Good to see you, Sudoku. We just rated Sudoku the other day. Gifted a couple skins for their skinathon. A successful skinathon for one of the HAP team community. Welcome in. How was the rest of stream? Snooze button. We no audio. Working lurk. It came with news. Good to see you. We had to have a shorter reading stream since it's so smoky and the air quality is it is not the best time to be up there, that's for sure. And I know I'm in Ohio, and like we have gotten like none of the bad smoke and fog and everything. Like if you go a little east and they're feeling the effects. And man, I really hope the rain picks up for you guys, and that way the firefighting can be done more effectively. It's never a good thing. To get not only wildfires of that magnitude, but then to have like such a dry spell. Yeah. Well, I do all I can. I'm doing the smoke sort of just rolls off of it. Like the good Lord's like, just don't worry about Ohio. Like there's enough going on there. Yeah. Because somebody said there's a meme, and I posted it not too long ago that said the word Ohio looks like a tractor, and now I'm mad, and it's right though. Like it's right, like it's right. We have cities here. Dang it, I'm in a city. Well, Snooze Button, I hope it gets better for you there. And I might have to check out this hockey sweater so that I can educate myself properly, like my favorite northern neighbors. Ohio's a track, right? Look at the word right there. It looks like a freaking tractor. It's a tractor. Because like I went to work at Disney for a while, for a year, and like people would always be like,
I wore, they're the Cleveland Guardians now, but I used to always wear a Cleveland Indians hat, and people would just call me Cleveland. It's a Canadian classic children's story for sure. I'll see if I can find my copy from Mom and Papa Snoozes. Nice. But yeah, so I would introduce, people just call me Cleveland down there, and they'd be like, hi, corn or cows? I'm like, neither. I live in a city. But if you drive out of the city, yeah, it's a lot of corn. It's a lot of cows. It's a lot of corn. It's a lot of cows. We make some good cheese here too. I mean, I know Wisconsin's got us, beat, but my profile pic, yeah. Yeah. I feel this pain also from the agricultural center that is Saskatchewan, Canada, right? You're like, I am not a farmer. If I was a farmer, I would not be awake right now because I would need to be up at like 4 a.m. So yeah, we're cruising right now. We got today and then 2 more days on 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. We just started in our Discord the next vote for the next book that we're reading. Did you guys finish up White Fang yet? Or wait, were you Call of the Wild or White? You were in White. We're doing White Fang, right? Because Call of the Wild and White Fang, 2 books by Jack London. One of them, domesticated animal feeling the wild side. The other one, wild side getting domesticated. We're getting there on White Fang. Yeah. Need to do some things and stuff. Oh, Annie, of course. Just good to see you. Good to have you here. Nice. Yeah, our vote currently, we just put it up today. We're going to run it for about 10 days for anybody that wants to hop in the Discord and vote. The vote is between The Adventures of Tom Sawyer, A Study in Scarlet, The Scarlet Letter, and The Wonderful Wizard of Oz. So we'll be reading one of those next. But thank you so much, Snooze Button. Snooze and Amp, a great streaming family. And Snooze Button's just a delight, guys. Like, I really have been enjoying the streams that I've been catching over there. When Proto League came in and told us, and we had rated Snooze, like, I don't know, way back in the day, and just like, yeah, I don't know, never crossed, and the 2 never crossed paths again. Choices, those are some choices. Way to go, Slevin, on giving people choices. But yeah, when Proto League was like, oh, you're starting reading streams, go hang out with Snooze, and I was like, this was a good suggestion. It's a good time, guys. Get over there, hit the follow button, even when they're not doing the reading, when they're playing the awesome video games and and everything. They just got done with Spirit Fair, which is one of the ones we've got on the docket coming up soonish. I don't know, us, we kind of go where the wind takes us, but so do yourself a favor, go hang out with another awesome captain. We're gonna get back into this. Jack London started heavy stomach issues later in life because ate a game heavy diet. Yeah, well, you can get gamey. It's fine. I mean that sucks for Jack London. Now we just eat like microplastics. I think I'd rather have a gamey meal than whatever. I don't know if we're ever going to finish this marbles map. I think there's some portals we're not hitting. We're at an hour and 3 minutes. I'm just going to let it keep running and see if somebody can beat this damn thing. Yeah. What's going on, Cyanite? All right. So just catching up, we've just had a shark fight where Captain Nemo saved a Indian diver going for oysters. Yes, it is still the first marbles map, yes. Which is fine. I'll let it run. somebody gonna win. And Captain Nemo stepped in, bravely and daringly fighting it with a knife. Ned Land stepped in to finish it off with a harpoon, and they got back. And now we are talking about the Arabian Tunnel, which is a hidden passage named by Captain Nemo, who found it, which is a sea passage akin to the Suez Canal, but beneath it, connecting the Red Sea and the Mediterranean. So we are about to make the voyage to the Mediterranean. And let's get back into it, guys. I'll restart this chapter. Chapter 5, The Arabian Tunnel. That same evening, in 21 degrees 30 minutes north latitude, the Nautilus floated on the surface of the sea. Approaching the Arabian coast, I saw Jeddah, the most important counting house of Egypt, Syria, Turkey, and India. I distinguished clearly enough its buildings, the vessels anchored at the quays, and those whose draught of water obliged them to anchor in the roads. The sun, rather low on the horizon, struck full on the houses of the town, bringing out their whiteness. Outside, some wooden cabins and some made of reeds showed the quarter inhabited by the Bedouins. Soon Jeddah was shut out from view by the shadows of night, and the Nautilus found herself under water, slightly phosphorescent. The next day, the 10th of February, we sighted several ships running to windward. The Nautilus returned to its submarine navigation, but at noon, when her bearings were taken, the sea being deserted, she rose again to her waterline. Accompanied by Ned and Conseil, I seated myself on the platform. The coast on the eastern side looked like a mass faintly printed upon a damp fog. We were leaning on the sides of the pinnace, talking of one thing and another, when Ned Land, stretching out his hands towards the spot on the sea, said, "Do you see anything there, sir?" "No, Ned," I replied, "but I have not your eyes, you know." "Look well," said Ned. "There, on the starboard beam, about the height of a lantern. Do you not see a mass which seems to move?" "Certainly," said I, after close attention. "I see something like a long black body on the top of the water." And certainly, before long, the black object was not more than a mile from us. It looked like a great sandbank deposited in the open sea. It was a gigantic dugong. Ned Land looked eagerly. His eyes shone with covetousness at the sight of the animal. His hand seemed ready to harpoon it. One would have thought he was awaiting the moment to throw himself into the sea and attack it in its element. At this instant, Captain Nemo appeared on the platform. He saw the dugong, understood the Canadian's attitude, and addressing him said, "If you held a harpoon just now, Master Land, would it not burn your hand?" "Just so, sir." "And you would not be sorry to go back for one day to your trade of a fisherman, and to add this cetacean to the list of those you have already killed?" "I should not, sir." "Well, you can try." "Thank you, sir," said Ned Land, his eyes flaming. "Only," continued the captain, "I advise you, for your own sake, not to miss the creature." "Is the dugong dangerous to attack?" "Yes," replied the captain. "Sometimes this animal turns upon its assailants and overturns their boat. But for Master Land, this danger is not to be feared. His eye is prompt, his arm sure." At this moment, several men of the crew, mute and as immovable as ever, mounted the platform. One carried a harpoon and a line, similar to those enjoyed in catching whales. The pinnace was lifted from the bridge, pulled from its socket, and let down into the sea. 6 oarsmen took their seats, and the coxswain went to the tiller. Ned, Conseil, and I went to the back of the boat. "You are not coming, Captain?" I asked. "No, sir. But I wish you good sport." The boat put off, and lifted by the 6 rowers, drew rapidly towards the dugong, and then floated about 2 miles from the Nautilus. Arrived some cable length from the cetacean, the speed slackened, and the oars dipped noiselessly into the quiet waters. Ned Land, harpoon in hand, stood in the forepart of the boat.
The harpoons used for striking the whale is generally attached to a very long cord, which runs out rapidly as the wounded creature draws it after him. But here the cord was not more than 10 fathoms long, and the extremity was attached to a small barrel which, by floating, was to show the course the dugong took under the water. I stood and carefully watched the Canadian's adversary. This dugong, which also bears the name of a halicore, closely resembles the manatee, its oblong body terminated in a lengthened tail, and its lateral fins in perfect fingers. Its difference from the manatee consisted in its upper jaw, which was armed with 2 long and pointed teeth, which formed on each side diverging tusks. This dugong, which Ned Land was preparing to attack, was of colossal dimensions. It was more than 7 yards long. It did not move and seemed to be sleeping on the waves, which circumstance made it easier to capture. The boat approached within 6 yards of the animal. The oars rested on the rowlocks. I half rose. Ned Land, his body thrown a little back, brandished the harpoon in his experienced hand. Suddenly, a hissing noise was heard and the dugong disappeared. The harpoon, although thrown with great force, had apparently only struck the water.
"Curse it!" exclaimed the Canadian furiously. "I have missed it!"
"No," said I, "the creature is wounded. Look at the blood, but your weapon has not struck in its body."
"My harpoon! My harpoon!"
cried Ned Land. The sailors rowed on, and the coxswain made for the floating barrel. The harpoon regained, we followed in pursuit of the animal. The latter came now and then to the surface to breathe. Its wound had not weakened it, for it shot onwards with great rapidity. The boat, rowed by strong arms, flew on its track. Several times it approached within some few yards, and the Canadian was ready to strike, but the dugong made off with a sudden plunge, and it was impossible to reach it. Imagine the passion which excited impatient Ned Land. He hurled at the unfortunate creature the most energetic expletives in the English tongue. For my part, I was only vexed to see the dugong escape all our attacks. We pursued it without relaxation for an hour, and I began to think it would prove difficult to capture, when the animal, possessed with the perverse idea of vengeance of which he had cause to repent, turned upon the pinnace and assailed us in its turn. This maneuver did not escape the Canadian. "Look out!" he cried. The coxswain said some words in his outlandish tongue, doubtless warning the men to keep on their guard. The dugong came within 20 feet of the boat, stopped, sniffed the air briskly with its large nostrils, not pierced at the extremity, but in the upper part of its muzzle. Then, taking a spring, he threw himself upon us. The pinnace could not avoid the shock, and half upset, shipped at least 2 tons of water, which had to be emptied, but thanks to the coxswain, we caught it sideways and not full front, so we were not quite overturned. While Ned Land, clinging to the bows, belabored the gigantic animals with blows from his harpoon, the creature's teeth were buried in the gunwale, and it lifted the whole thing out of the water as a lion does a roebuck. We were upset over one another, and I know not how the adventure would have ended if the Canadian, still enraged with the beast, had not struck it to the heart. I heard its teeth grind on the iron plate, and the dugong disappeared, carrying the harpoon with him. But the barrel soon returned to the surface, and shortly after the body of the animal turned on its back. The boat came up with it, took it in tow, and made straight for the Nautilus. It required tackle of enormous strength to hoist the dugong on the platform. It weighed 10,000 pounds. The next day, 11th February, the larder of the Nautilus was enriched by some delicate game. A flight of sea swallows rested on the Nautilus. It was a species of the Sterna nilotica, peculiar to Egypt. Its beak is black, head gray and pointed, the eye surrounded by white spots, the back, wings, and tail of a grayish color, the belly and throat white, and claws red. They also took some dozen of Nile ducks, a wild bird of high flavor, its throat and upper part of the head white with black spots. About 5 o'clock in the evening, we sighted the North Cape of Ras Mohammed. This cape forms the extremity of Arabia Petraea, comprised between the Gulf of Suez and the Gulf of Aqaba. The Nautilus penetrated into the Straits of Jubal, which leads to the Gulf of Suez. I distinctly saw a high mountain towering between the 2 gulfs of Ras Mohammed. It was Mount Horeb, that Sinai, on the top of which Moses saw God face to face. At 6 o'clock, the Nautilus, sometimes floating, sometimes immersed, passed some distance from Tor, situated at the end of the bay, the waters of which seemed tinted with red, an observation already made by Captain Nemo. The night fell in the midst of a heavy silence, sometimes broken by the cries of the pelican and other night birds, and the noise of the waves breaking upon the shore, chafing against the rocks, or the panting of some far-off steamer beating the waters of the Gulf with its noisy paddles. From 8 to 9 o'clock, the Nautilus remained some fathoms under the water. According to my calculation, we must have been very near Suez. Through the panel of the saloon, I saw the bottom of the rocks brilliantly lit up by our electric lamp. We seemed to be leaving the straits behind us more and more. At 9:15, the vessels having returned to the surface, I mounted the platform. Most impatient to pass through Captain Nemo's tunnel, I could not stay in one place, so came to breathe the fresh night air. Soon in the shadow I saw a pale light, half discolored by the fog, shining about a mile from us. "A floating lighthouse," said someone near me. I turned and saw the captain. "It is the floating light of Suez," he continued. "It will not be long before we gain the entrance of the tunnel." "The entrance cannot be easy." "No, sir. For that reason I am accustomed to go into the steersman cage and myself direct our course. And now, if you will go down, Monsieur Ahana, the Nautilus is going under the waves and will not return to the surface until we have passed through the Arabian Tunnel." Captain Nemo led me towards the central staircase. Halfway down, he opened a door, traversed the upper deck, and landed in the pilot's cage, which, it may be remembered, rose at the extremity of the platform. It was a cabin measuring 6 feet square, very much like that occupied by the pilot on the steamboats of the Mississippi or Hudson. In the midst worked a wheel, placed vertically and caught to the tiller rope, which ran to the back of the Nautilus. 4 light ports with lenticular glasses let in a groove in the partition of the cabin allowed the man at the wheel to see in all directions. This cabin was dark, but soon my eyes accustomed themselves to the obscurity, and I perceived the pilot, a strong man, with his hands resting on the spokes of the wheel. Outside, the sea appeared vividly lit up by the lantern, which shed its rays from the back of the cabin to the other extremity of the platform. "Now," said Captain Nemo, "let us try to make our passage." Electric wires connected the pilot's cage with the machinery room, and from there the captain could communicate simultaneously to his Nautilus the direction and the speed. He pressed a metal knob, and at once the speed of the screw diminished. I looked in silence at the high straight wall we were running by at this moment, the immovable base of a massive sandy coast. We followed it thus for an hour, only some few yards off. Captain Nemo did not take his eye from the knob, suspended by its 2 concentric circles in the cabin. At a simple gesture, the pilot modified the course of the Nautilus every instant. I had placed myself at the port scuttle, and some magnificent substructures of coral, zoophytes, seaweed, and fucus agitated their enormous claws, which stretched out from the fissures of the rock. At 10:15, the captain himself took the helm. A large gallery, black and deep, opened before us. The Nautilus went boldly into it. A strange roaring was heard round its sides. It was the waters of the Red Sea, which the incline of the tunnel precipitated violently towards the Mediterranean. The Nautilus went with the torrent, rapid as an arrow, in spite of the efforts of the machinery, which, in order to offer more effective resistance, beat the waves with reversed screw. On the walls of the narrow passage, I could see nothing but brilliant rays, straight lines, furrows of fire, traced by the great speed under the brilliant electric light. My heart beat fast. At 10:35, Captain Nemo quitted the helm and, turning to me, said, "The Mediterranean." In less than 20 minutes, the Nautilus, carried along by the torrent, had passed through the Isthmus of Suez. End of chapter 5. Chapter 6. The Grecian Archipelago. The next day, the 12th of February, at the dawn of day, the Nautilus rose to the surface. I hastened onto the platform. 3 miles to the south, the dim outline of Pelusium was to be seen. A torrent had carried us from one sea to another. About 7 o'clock, Ned and Conseil joined me. "Well, Sir Naturalist," said the Canadian in a slightly jovial tone, "and the Mediterranean?" "We are floating on its surface, friend Ned." "What?" said Conseil. "This very night?" "Yes, this very night. In a few minutes we have passed this impassable isthmus." "I do not believe it," replied the Canadian. "Then you are wrong, Master Land," I continued. "This low coast, which rounds off to the south, is the Egyptian coast, and you who have such good eyes, Ned, you can see the jetty of Port Said stretching into the sea." The Canadian looked attentively. "Certainly you are right, sir, and your captain is a first-rate man. We are in the Mediterranean. Good. Now, if you please, let us talk of our own little affair, but so that no one hears us." I saw what the Canadian wanted, and in any case, I thought it better to let him talk as he wished it. So we all three went and sat down near the lantern where we were less exposed to the spray of the blades. "Now, Ned, we listen. What have you to tell us?" "What I have to tell you is very simple. We are in Europe, and before Captain Nemo's caprices drag us once more to the bottom of the polar seas or lead us into Oceania, I ask to leave the Nautilus." I wished in no way to shackle the liberty of my companions, but I certainly felt no desire to leave Captain Nemo. Thanks to him and thanks to his apparatus, I was each day nearer the completion of my submarine studies, and I was rewriting my book of submarine depths in its very element. Should I ever again have such an opportunity of observing the wonders of the ocean? No, certainly not. And I could not bring myself to the idea of abandoning the Nautilus before the cycle of investigation was accomplished. "Friend Ned, answer me frankly. Are you tired of being on board? Are you sorry that destiny has thrown us into Captain Nemo's hands?" The Canadian remained some moments without answer, then crossing his arms, he said, "Frankly, I do not regret this journey under the seas. I shall be glad to have made it. But now that it is made, let us have been done with it. That is my idea." "It will come to an end, Ned." "Where and when?" "Where, I do not know. When, I cannot say, or rather, I suppose it will end when these seas have nothing more to teach us." "Then what do you hope for?" demanded the Canadian. "That circumstances may occur as well 6 months hence as now, by which we may and ought to profit." "Oh," said Ned Land, "and where shall we be in 6 months, if you please, Sir Naturalist?" "Perhaps in China. You know the Nautilus is a rapid traveler. It goes through water as swallows through the air, or as an express on the land. It does not fear frequented seas. Who can say that it may not beat the coasts of France, England, or America, on which flight may be attempted as advantageously as here?" "Monsieur Ahana," replied the Canadian, "your arguments are rotten at the foundation. You speak in the future. We shall be there. We shall be here. I speak in the present. We are here, and we must profit by it." Ned Land's logic pressed me hard, and I felt myself beaten on that ground. I knew not what argument would now tell in my favor. "Sir," continued Ned, "let us suppose an impossibility. If Captain Nemo should this day offer you your liberty, would you accept it?" "I do not know," I answered. "And if," he added, "the offer made you this day was never to be renewed, would you accept it?" "Friend Ned, this is my answer. Your reasoning is against me. You must not rely on Captain Nemo's goodwill. Common prudence forbids him to set us at liberty. On the other side, prudence bids us profit by the first opportunity to leave the Nautilus." Well, Monsieur Ahana, that is wisely said.
Only one observation, just one. The occasion must be serious, and our first attempt must succeed. If it fails, we shall never find another, and Captain Nemo will never forgive us.
All that is true, replied the Canadian, but your observation applies equally to all attempts at flight, whether in 2 years' time or in 2 days. But the question is still this: if a favorable opportunity presents itself, it must be seized.
Agreed. And now, Ned, will you tell me what you mean by a favorable opportunity?
It will be that which, on a dark night, will bring the Nautilus a short distance from some European coast.
And you will try and save yourself by swimming?
Yes, if we are near enough to the bank, and if the vessel was floating at the time, not if the bank was far away and the boat was underwater.
And in that case?
In that case, I should seek to make myself master of the pinnace. I know how it is worked. We must get inside, and the bolts once drawn, we shall come to the surface of the water, without even a pilot who is in the bows perceiving our flight.
Well, Ned, watch for the opportunity, but do not forget that a hitch will ruin us.
I will not forget, sir.
And now, Ned, would you like to know what I think of your project?
Certainly, Monsieur Ahana.
Well, I do not say I hope. I think that this favorable opportunity will never present itself.
Why not?
Because Captain Nemo cannot hide from himself that we have not given up all hope of regaining our liberty, and he will be on his guard, above all, in the seas and in the sights of European coasts.
We shall see, replied Ned, shaking his head determinedly.
And now, Ned Land, let us stop here. Not another word on the subject. The day that you are ready, come and let us know, and we will follow you. I rely entirely upon you.
Thus ended a conversation which, at no very distant time, led to such grave results. I must say here that the facts seem to confirm my foresight to the Canadian's great despair. Did Captain Nemo distrust us in these frequented seas, or did he only wish to hide himself from the numerous vessels of all nations which plowed the Mediterranean? I could not tell, but we were oftener between waters and far from the coast, or, if the Nautilus did emerge, nothing was to be seen but the pilot's cage, and sometimes it went to great depths, for between the Grecian archipelago and Asia Minor, we could not touch the bottom by more than 1,000 fathoms. Thus, I only know that we were near the island of Carpathos, one of the Sporades, by Captain Nemo reciting these lines from Virgil. Est Carpathio, Neptuni gurgiet vats, Carudius Proteus. And he pointed to a spot on the planisphere. It was indeed the ancient abode of Proteus, the old shepherd of Neptune's flocks. Now the island of Scarpanto, situated between Rhodes and Crete. I saw nothing but the granite base through the glass panels of the saloon. The next day, the 14th of February, I resolved to employ some hours in studying the fishes of the archipelago. But for some reason or other, the panels remained hermetically sealed. Upon taking the course of the Nautilus, I found that we were going towards Candia, the ancient isle of Crete. At the time I embarked upon the Abraham Lincoln, the whole of this island had risen in insurrection against the despotism of the Turks. But how the insurgents had fared since that time, I was absolutely ignorant, and it was not Captain Nemo, deprived of all land communications, who could tell me. I made no allusion to this event when that night I found myself alone with him in the saloon. Besides, he seemed to be taciturn and preoccupied. Then, contrary to his custom, he ordered both panels to be opened, and, going from one to the other, observed the mass of waters attentively. To what end I could not guess, so on my side, I employed my time in studying the fish passing before my eyes. In the midst of the waters a man appeared, a diver, carrying at his belt a leathern purse. It was not a body abandoned to the waves. It was a living man, swimming with a strong hand, disappearing occasionally to take a breath at the surface. I turned towards Captain Nemo and in an agitated voice exclaimed, "A man shipwrecked! He must be saved at any price!" "A man! A shipwrecked sailor!" I cried. The captain did not answer me, but came and leaned against the panel. The man had approached, and with his face flattened against the glass, was looking at us. To my great amazement, Captain Nemo signed to him.
The diver answered with his hand, mounted immediately to the surface of water, and did not appear again.
"Do not be uncomfortable," said Captain Nemo. "It is Nicholas of Cape Matapan, surnamed Pesca. He is well known in all the Cyclades. A bold diver. Water is his element, and he lives more in it than on land, going continually from one island to another, even as far as Crete."
"You know him, Captain?"
"Why not, Monsieur Ahana?"
Saying which, Captain Nemo went towards a piece of furniture standing near the left panel of the saloon. Near this piece of furniture, I saw a chest bound with iron, on which the cover of which was a copper plate bearing the cipher of the Nautilus with its device. At that moment, the captain, without noticing my presence, opened the piece of furniture, a sort of strongbox, which held a great many ingots. There were ingots of gold, from whence came this precious metal, which represented an enormous sum. Where did the captain gather this gold from, and what was he going to do with it? I did not say one word. I looked. Captain Nemo took the ingots one by one and arranged them methodically in the chest, which he filled entirely. I estimated the contents at more than 4,000 pounds weight of gold, that is to say, nearly 200,000 pounds. The chest was securely fastened, and the captain wrote an address on the lid in characters which must have belonged to modern Greece. This done, Captain Nemo pressed a knob, the wire of which communicated with the quarters of the crew. 4 men appeared, and, not without some trouble, pushed the chest out of the saloon. Then I heard them hoisting it up the iron staircase by means of pulleys. At that moment, Captain Nemo turned to me.
"And you were saying, sir?" said he.
I was saying nothing, Captain."
"Then, sir, if you will allow me, I wish you good night."
Whereupon he turned and left the saloon. I returned to my room much troubled, as one may believe. I vainly tried to sleep. I sought the connecting link between the apparition of the diver and the chest filled with gold. Soon, I felt by certain movements of pitching and tossing that the Nautilus was leaving the depths and returning to the surface. Then I heard steps upon the platform, and I knew they were unfastening the pinnace and launching it upon the waves. For one instant it struck the side of the Nautilus, and then all noise ceased. 2 hours after, same noise, the same going and coming was renewed, the boat was hoisted on board, replaced in its socket, and the Nautilus again plunged under the waves. So these millions had been transported to their address. To what point of the continent? Who was Captain Nemo's correspondent? The next day I related to Conseil and the Canadian the events of the night, which had excited my curiosity to the highest degree. My companions were not less surprised than myself.
"But where does he take his millions to?" asked Ned Land.
To that there was no possible answer. I returned to the saloon after having breakfast and set to work. Till 5 o'clock in the evening I employed myself in arranging my notes. At that moment, ought I to attribute it to some peculiar idiosyncrasy, I felt so great a heat that I was obliged to take off my coat. It was strange, for we were under low latitudes, and even then the Nautilus, submerged as it was, ought to experience no change of temperature. I looked at the manometer. It showed a depth of 60 feet to which atmospheric heat could never attain. I continued my work, but the temperature rose to such a pitch as to be intolerable. Could there be a fire on board? I asked myself. I was leaving the saloon when Captain Nemo entered. He approached the thermometer, consulted, and turning to me said,
42 degrees.
"I have noticed it, Captain," I replied, "and if it gets much hotter, we cannot bear it."
"Oh, sir, it will not get better if we do not wish it."
"You can reduce it as you please, then."
"No, but I can go further from the stove which produces it."
"It is outward, then."
"Certainly. We are floating in a current of boiling water."
"It is possible?" I exclaimed.
"Look."
The panels opened, and I saw the sea entirely white all around. A sulphurous smoke was curling amid the waves, which boiled like water in a copper. I placed my hand on one of the panes of glass, but the heat was so great that I quickly took it off again. "Where are we?" I asked.
"Near the island of Santorin, sir."
replied the captain. "I wish to give you a sight of the curious spectacle of a submarine eruption."
"I thought," said I, "that the formation of these new islands was ended."
"Nothing is ever ended in the volcanic parts of the sea," replied Captain Nemo, "and the globe is always being worked by subterranean fires. Already in the 19th year of our era, according to Cassiodorus and Pliny, a new island, Theia, the Divine, appeared in the very place where these islets have recently been formed. Then they sank under the waves to rise again in the year 69, where they again subsided. Since that time to our days, the Plutonian work has been suspended. But on the 3rd of February 1866, a new island, which they named George Island, emerged from the midst of the sulphurous vapor near Kamini, and settled again the 6th of the same month. 7 days after the 13th of February, the island of Aphroisa appeared, leaving between near Kamina and itself a canal 10 yards broad. I was in these seas when the phenomena occurred, and I was able, therefore, to observe all the different phases. The island of Aphroisa of round form measured 30 feet in diameter, 30 feet in height. It was composed of black and vitreous lava mixed with fragments of feldspar. And lastly, on the 10th of March, a small island called Reka showed itself near Kamina, and since then 3 have joined together, forming but one and the same island.
"And in the canal in which we are at this moment?" I asked.
"Here it is," replied Captain Nemo, showing me a map of the archipelago. "You see, I have marked the new islands." I returned to the glass. The Nautilus was no longer moving. The heat was becoming unbearable. The sea, which till now had been white, was red, owing to the presence of salts of iron. In spite of the ships being hermetically sealed, an insupportable smell of sulfur filled the saloon, and the brilliancy of the electricity was entirely extinguished by bright scarlet flames. I was in a bath. I was choking. I was broiled.
"We can no longer remain in this boiling water," said I to the captain.
"It would not be prudent," replied the impassive Captain Nemo. An order was given. The Nautilus tacked about and left the furnace it could not brave with impunity. A quarter of an hour after we were breathing fresh air on the surface, the thought then struck me that if Ned Land had chosen this part of sea for our flight, we should never come alive out of this sea of fire. The next day, the 16th of February, left the basin, which between Rhodes and Alexandria is reckoned about 1,500 fathoms in depth, and the Nautilus, passing some distance from Cerigo, quitted the Grecian archipelago, and having doubled Cape Matapan. End of chapter 6. All right, so we've got probably 2 more chapters to make. And then we'll do about an hour more of stream. Maybe. I don't know. Chapter 7. The Mediterranean in 48 Hours. The Mediterranean, the blue sea par excellence, the great sea of the Hebrews, the sea of the Greeks, the Mare Nostrum of the Romans, bordered by orange trees, aloes, cacti, and sea pines, embalmed with the perfume of the myrtle, surrounded by rude mountains, saturated with pure and transparent air, but incessantly worked by underground fires, a perfect battlefield in which Neptune and Pluto still dispute the empire of the world. It is upon these banks and on these waters, says Michelet, that man is renewed in one of the most powerful climates of the globe. But, beautiful as it was, I could only take a rapid glance at the basin, whose superficial area is 2 millions of square yards. Even Captain Nemo's knowledge was lost to me, for this puzzling person did not appear during our passage at full speed. I estimated the course which the Nautilus took under the waves of the sea at about 600 leagues, and it was accomplished in 48 hours. Starting on the morning of the 16th of February from the shores of Greece, we had crossed the Straits of Gibraltar by the sunrise of the 18th. It was plain to me that this Mediterranean, enclosed in the midst of those countries which he wished to avoid, was distasteful to Captain Nemo.
Those waves and those breezes brought back too many remembrances, if not too many regrets. Here, he had no longer that independence and that liberty of gait which he had when in the open seas, and his Nautilus felt itself cramped between the close shores of Africa and Europe. Our speed was now 25 miles an hour. It may be well understood that Ned Land, to his great disgust, was obliged to renounce his intended flight. He could not launch the pinnace going at the rate of 12 or 13 yards every second. To quit the Nautilus under such conditions would be as bad as jumping from a train going at full speed, an imprudent thing, to say the least of it. Besides, our vessel only mounted to the surface of the waves at night to renew its stock of air. It was steered entirely by the compass and the log. I saw no more of the interior of this Mediterranean than a traveler by express train perceives of the landscape which flies before his eyes, that is to say, the distant horizon, and not the near objects which pass like a flash of lightning. We were then passing between Sicily and the coast of Tunis, in the narrow space between Cape Bon and the Straits of Messina. The bottom of the sea rose almost suddenly. There was a perfect bank on which there was not more than 9 fathoms of water, whilst on either side the depth was 90 fathoms. The Nautilus had to maneuver very carefully so as not to strike against this submarine barrier. I showed Conseil on the map of the Mediterranean the spot occupied by this reef. "But if you please, sir," observed Conseil, "it's like a real isthmus joining Europe to Africa." "Yes, my boy, it forms a perfect bar to the Straits of Libya, and the surroundings of Smith have proved that in the former times the continents between Cape Boko and Cape Farina were joined." "I can well believe it," said Conseil. "I will add," I continued, "that a similar barrier exists between Gibraltar and Ceuta, when in geological times formed the entire Mediterranean." "What if some volcanic burst should one day raise these two barriers above the waves?" "It is not probable, Conseil." "Well, but allow me to finish, please, sir. If this phenomena should take place, it would be troublesome for Monsieur Lesseps, who has taken so much pains to pierce the isthmus." "I agree with you, but I repeat, Conseil, this phenomena will never happen. The violence of subterranean force is ever diminishing. Volcanoes so plentiful in the first days of the world are being extinguished by degrees. The internal heat is weakened. The temperature of the lowest strata of the globe is lowered by a perceptible quality every century to the detriment of our globe, for its heat is its life." "But by the sun." "The sun is not sufficient, Conseil. Can it give heat to a dead body?" "Not that I know of." "Well, my friend, this earth will one day be that of cold corpse. It will become uninhabitable and uninhabited like the moon, which has long since lost all its vital heat." "In how many centuries?" "In some hundreds of thousands of years, my boy." "Then," said Conseil, "we shall have time to finish our journey, that is, if Ned Land does not interfere with it." And Conseil, reassured, returned to the study of the bank, which the Nautilus was skirting at a moderate speed. During the night of the 16th and 17th February, we had entered the second Mediterranean basin, the greatest depth of which was 1,450 fathoms. The Nautilus, by the action of its crew, slid down the inclined planes and buried itself in the lowest depths of the sea. On the 18th of February, about 3 o'clock in the morning, we were at the entrance of the Straits of Gibraltar. There once exist 2 currents, an upper one, long since recognized, which conveys the waters of the ocean into the basins of the Mediterranean, and a lower countercurrent, which reasonably was now shown to exist. Indeed, the volume of water in the Mediterranean, incessantly added to by the waves of the Atlantic and by rivers falling into it, which each year would raise the level of the sea, for its evaporation is not sufficient to restore the equilibrium. As it is not so, we must necessarily admit the existence of an undercurrent which empties into the basin of the Atlantic through the Straits of Gibraltar the surplus waters of the Mediterranean, a fact indeed, and it was this countercurrent by which the Nautilus proffered. Its advance rapidly by the narrow pass. For one instant I caught a glimpse of the beautiful ruins of the Temple of Hercules, buried in the ground according to Pliny, and with the low island which supports it, and a few minutes later we were floating in the Atlantic.
End of chapter 7. All right, I'm going to run to the restroom really quickly, and then we'll get back to it. Yeah, Postal Service will do. I'll be right back. Yeah, for my marble friends, I don't think we're going to finish this map. We just keep getting unlucky, I guess. The world record's on at 24 minutes and 45 seconds. We're at an hour and 45 minutes. But I'll just, when we stop reading, I'll end it if nobody's finished it, and we'll do a couple other things. New season for Marvel starts tomorrow at noon. Yeah, I don't think we're finishing it, Romana. We just keep getting unlucky with the portals and the paths. I'm not sure what we have to do to switch the lock, or if we are keep switching the lock back and forth. I don't know. All right. So let's do one more chapter, and then we'll still continue to stream. But I'd like to, unless this chapter is really short, because to keep our pace, we need to do about 7 more pages, which I feel like that's been about average for chapters, you know? If we stopped here, we would still be okay, but we are just slightly ahead, you know, which I like to be. I like, you know, like the last night to not be 2 hours. Chapter 8, Vigo Bay. The Atlantic, a vast sheet of water whose superficial area covers 25 millions of square miles, the length of which is 9,000 miles with a mean breadth of 2,700, an ocean whose parallel winding shores embrace an immense circumference, watered by the largest rivers of the world, the St. Lawrence, the Mississippi, the Amazon, the Plata, the Orinoco, the Niger, the Senegal, the Elbe, the Loire, the Rhine, which carry water from the most civilized as well as from the most savage countries. Magnificent field of water, incessantly plowed by vessels of every nation, sheltered by the flags of every nation, and which terminates in those 2 terrible points so dreaded by mariners, Cape Horn and the Cape of Tempests. The Nautilus was piercing the water with its sharp spur after having accomplished nearly 10,000 leagues in 3 months and a half. A distance greater than the great circle of the earth. Where were we going now? And what reserved for the future? The Nautilus, leaving the Straits of Gibraltar, had gone far out. It returned to the surface of the waves, and our daily walks on the platform were restored to us. I mounted at once, accompanied by Ned Land and Conseil. At a distance of about 12 miles, Cape St. Vincent was dimly to be seen, forming the southwestern point of the Spanish peninsula. A strong southerly gale was blowing. The Sea was swollen and billowy. It made the Nautilus rock violently. It was almost impossible to keep one's foot on the platform with the heavy rolls of the sea beat over every instant, so we descended after inhaling some mouthfuls of fresh air. I returned to my room, Conseil to his cabin, but the Canadian, with a preoccupied air, followed me. Our rapid passage across the Mediterranean had not allowed him to put his project into execution, and he could not help showing his disappointment. When the door of my room was shut, he sat down and looked at me silently. "Friend Ned, I understand you, but you cannot reproach yourself. To have attempted to leave the Nautilus under these circumstances would have been folly." Ned Land did not answer. His compressed lips and frowning brow showed with him the violent possession this fixed idea had taken of his mind. "Let us see," I continued. "We need not despair yet. We are going up the coast of Portugal again. France and England are not far off, where we can easily find refuge. Now, if the Nautilus, on leaving the Straits of Gibraltar, had gone to the south, if it had carried us towards regions which there were no continents, I should share your uneasiness. But we know now that Captain Nemo does not fly from civilized seas, and in some days I think you can act with security." Ned Land still looked at me fixedly. At length his fixed lips parted, and he said, "It is for tonight." I drew myself up suddenly. I was, I admit, little prepared for this communication. I waited to answer the Canadian, but words would not come. "We agreed to wait for an opportunity," continued Ned Land. "And the opportunity has arrived. This night we shall be but a few miles from the Spanish coast. It is cloudy, the wind blows freely. I have your word, Monsieur Ahana, and I rely upon you." As I was silent, the Canadian approached me. "Tonight, at 9 o'clock, said he. "I have warned Conseil. At that moment, Captain Nemo will be shut up in his room, probably in bed. Neither the engineers nor the ship's crew can see us. Conseil and I will gain the central staircase, and you, Monsieur Ahana, will remain in the library 2 steps from us, waiting my signal. The oars, the mast, and the sail are in the canoe. I have even succeeded in getting some provisions. I have procured an English wrench to unfasten the bolts which attach it to the shell of the Nautilus, so all is ready till tonight." The sea is bad." "That I allow," replied the Canadian. "But we must risk that. Liberty is worth paying for. Besides, the boat is strong, and a few miles with a fair wind to carry us is no great thing. Who knows but by tomorrow we may be 100 leagues away. Let circumstances only favor us, and by 10 or 11 o'clock we shall have landed on some spot of terra firma, alive or dead. But adieu now, till tonight." With these words, the Canadian withdrew, leaving me almost dumb. I had imagined that, the chance gone, I should have time to reflect and study on the matter. My obstinate companion had given me no time, and after all, what could I have said to him? Ned Land was perfectly right. There was almost the opportunity to profit by. Could I retract my word? Take upon myself the responsibility of compromising the future of my companions? Tomorrow, Captain Nemo might take us far from land, all I land. In that moment, a rather loud hissing noise told me the reservoirs were filling and that the Nautilus was sinking under the waves of the Atlantic. A sad day I passed between the desire of regaining my liberty of action and of abandoning the wonderful Nautilus, and leaving my submarine studies incomplete. What dreadful hours I passed thus, sometimes seeing myself and companions safely landed, sometimes wishing, in spite of my reason, that some unforeseen circumstance would prevent the realization of Ned Land's project. Twice I went to the saloon. I wished to consult the compass. I wished to see if the direction the Nautilus was taking was bringing us nearer or taking us farther from the coast, but no. The Nautilus kept in Portuguese waters. I must therefore take my part and prepare for flight. My luggage was not heavy, my notes nothing more.
As to Captain Nemo, I asked myself what he would think of our escape, what trouble, what wrong it might cause him, and what he might do in case of its discovery or failure. Certainly, I had no cause to complain of him. On the contrary, never was hospitality freer than his. In leaving him, I could not be taxed with ingratitude. No oath bound us to him. It was on strength of circumstances he relied, and not upon our word, to fix us forever. I had not seen the captain since our visit to the island of Santorin. Would chance bring me to his presence before our departure? I wished it, and I feared it at the same time. I listened if I could hear him walk in the room contiguous to mine. No sound reached my ear, and I felt an unbearable easiness. This day of waiting seemed eternal. Hours struck too slowly to keep pace with my impatience. My dinner was served in my room as usual. I ate but little. I was too preoccupied. I left the table at 7 o'clock. 120 minutes, I counted them, still separated me from the moment in which I was to join Ned Land, and my agitation redoubled. My pulse beat violently. I could not remain quiet. I went and came, hoping to calm my troubled spirit by constant movement. The idea of failure in our bold enterprise was the least painful of my anxieties, but the thought of seeing our project discovered before leaving the Nautilus, of being brought before Captain Nemo, irritated or, what was worse, saddened at my desertion, made my heart beat. I wanted to see the saloon for the last time. I descended the stairs and arrived in the museum where I had passed so many useful and agreeable hours. I looked at all its riches, all its treasures, like a man on the eve of an eternal exile who was leaving never to return. These wonders of nature, these masterpieces of art, amongst which for so many days my life had been concentrated, I was going to abandon them forever. I should like to have taken a last look through the windows of the saloon into the waters of the Atlantic, but the panels were hermetically closed, and a cloak of steel separated me from that ocean which I had not yet explored. In passing through the saloon, I came near the door let into the angle which opened into the captain's room. To my great surprise, this door was ajar. I drew back voluntarily. If Captain Nemo should be in his room, he could see me. But hearing no sound, I drew nearer. The room was deserted. I pushed open the door and took some steps forward, still the same monk-like severity of aspect. Suddenly, the clock struck 8. The first beat of the hammer on the bell awoke me from my dreams. I trembled as if an invisible eye had plunged into my most secret thoughts, and I hurried from the room. There, my eye fell upon the compass. Our course was still north. The log indicated moderate speed, the manometer a depth of about 60 feet. I returned to my room, clothed myself warmly, sea boots, an otter-skin cap, a great coat of byssus lined with sealskin. I was ready. I was waiting. The vibration of the screw alone broke the deep silence which reigned on board. I listened attentively. Would no loud voice suddenly inform me that Ned Land had been surprised in his projected flight? A mortal dread hung over me, and I vainly tried to regain my accustomed coolness. At a few minutes to 9, I put my ear to the captain's door. No noise. I left my room and returned to the saloon, which was half in obscurity but deserted. I opened the door communicating with the library. The same insufficient light, the same solitude. I placed myself near the door leading to the central staircase, and there waited for Ned Land's signal. At that moment, the trembling of the screw sensibly diminished. Then it stopped entirely. The silence was now only disturbed by the beatings of my own heart. Suddenly, a slight shock was felt, and I knew that the Nautilus had stopped at the bottom of the ocean. My uneasiness increased. The Canadian signal did not come. I felt inclined to join Ned Land and beg of him to put off his attempt. I felt that we were not sailing under our usual conditions. At this moment, the door of the large saloon opened and Captain Nemo appeared. He saw me and without further preamble began in an amiable tone of voice.
"Ah, sir, I have been looking for you. Do you know the history of Spain?"
Now, one might know the history of one's own country by heart, but in the condition I was in the time, with troubled mind and head quite lost, I could not have said a word of it.
"Well," continued Captain Nemo, "you heard my question. Do you know the history of Spain?"
Very slightly, I answered.
Well, here are learned men having to learn, said the captain. Come, sit down, and I will tell you a curious episode in this history. Sir, listen well, said he. This history will interest you on one side, for it will answer a question which doubtless you have not been able to solve.
I listen, Captain, said I, not knowing what my interlocutor was driving at, and asking myself if this incident was bearing on our projected flight.
Sir, if you have no objection, we will go back to 1702. You cannot be ignorant that your king, Louis XIV, thinking that the gesture of potentate was sufficient to bring Pyrenees under his yoke, had imposed the Duke of Anjou, his grandson, on the Spaniards. This prince reigned more or less badly under the name of Philip V, and had a strong party against him abroad. Indeed, the preceding year, the royal houses of Holland, Austria, and England had concluded a treaty of alliance at The Hague with the intention of plucking the crown of Spain from the head of Philip V and placing it upon that of the Archduke, whom they prematurely gave the title of Charles III. Spain must resist this coalition, but she was almost entirely unprovided with either soldiers or sailors. However, money would not fail them, provided that their galleons, laden with gold and silver from America, once entered their ports. At about the end of 1702, they expected a rich convoy which France was escorting with a fleet of 23 vessels, commanded by Admiral Chateau Renaud, for the ships of the coalition were already beating the Atlantic. This convoy was to go to Cadiz, but the Admiral, hearing that an English fleet was cruising in those waters, resolved to make for a French port. The Spanish commanders of the convoy objected to this decision. They wanted to take him to a Spanish port, and if not Cadiz, into Vigo Bay, situated on the northwest coast of Spain, and which was not blocked. Admiral Chateau Renaud had the rashness to obey this injunction, and the galleons entered Vigo Bay. Unfortunately, it formed an open road which could not be defended in any way. They must therefore hasten to unload the galleons before the arrival of the combined fleet, and time would not have failed them had a miserable question of rivalry suddenly arisen. You are following this chain of events? Asked Captain Nemo. Perfectly, said I, not knowing the end proposed by this historical lesson. I will continue. This is what passed. The merchants of Cadiz had a privilege by which they had the right of receiving all merchandise coming from the West Indies. Now, to disembark these ingots at the port of Vigo was depriving of them of their rights. They complained at Madrid and obtained the consent of the weak-minded Philip that the convoy, without discharging its cargo, should remain sequestered in the roads of Vigo until the enemy had disappeared. But whilst coming to this decision on the 22nd of October, 1702, the English vessels arrived in Vigo Bay when Admiral Chateau Renaud, in spite of inferior forces, fought bravely. But seeing that the treasure must fall into the enemy's hands, he burnt and scuttled every galleon which went to the bottom with their immense riches. Captain Nemo stopped. I admit I could not see why this history should interest me. Well? I asked. Well, Monsieur Ahonat, replied Captain Nemo, we are in that Vigo Bay, and it rests with you whether you will penetrate its mysteries. The captain rose, telling me to follow him. I had time to recover. I obeyed. The saloon was dark, but through the transparent glass the waves were sparkling. I looked. For half a mile around the Nautilus, the water seemed bathed in electric light. The sandy bottom was clean and bright. Some of the ship's crew in their diving dresses were clearing away half-rotten barrels and empty cases from which the midst of the blackened wrecks.
From these cases and from these barrels escaped ingots of gold and silver, cascades of piastres and jewels. The sand was heaped up with them. Laden with their precious booty, the men returned to the Nautilus, disposed of the burden, and went back to this inexhaustible fishery of gold and silver. I understood now. This was the scene of the battle of the 22nd of October, 1702. Here, on this very spot, the galleons laden for the Spanish government had sunk. Here, Captain Nemo came, according to his wants, to pack up those millions with which he burdened the Nautilus. It was for him and him alone America had given up her precious metals. He was heir direct, without anyone to share in those treasures torn from the Incas and from the conquered of Ferdinand Cortez.
Did you know, sir, he asked, smiling, that the sea contained such riches?
I knew, answered, that they value money held in suspicion in these waters at 2 millions.
Doubtless. But to extract this money, the expense would be greater than the profit. Here, on the contrary, I have but to pick up what man has lost, and not only in Vigo Bay, but in 1,000 other ports where shipwrecks have happened, and which are marked on my submarine map. Can you now understand the source of the millions I am worth?
I understand, Captain, but allow me to tell you that in exploring Vigo Bay, you have only beforehand with a rival society.
And which?
A society which has received from the Spanish government the privilege of seeking those buried galleons. The shareholders are led on by the allurement of an enormous bounty for which these rich shipwrecks at 500 millions.
500 millions they were, answered Captain Nemo, but they are so no longer.
Just so, said I. And a warning to those shareholders would be an act of charity, but who knows if it should be well received. What gamblers usually regret above all is the loss of their money than of their foolish hopes. After all, I pity them less than in the thousands of unfortunates to whom so much riches well distributed would have been profitable, whilst for them they shall forever be barren. I had no sooner exposed this regret than I felt it must have wounded Captain Nemo.
Barren,
he exclaimed with animation.
Do you think then, sir, that these riches are lost because I gather them? Is it for myself alone, according to your idea, that I take the trouble to collect these treasures? Who told you that I did not make good use of it? Do you think I am ignorant that there are suffering beings and oppressed races on this earth, miserable creatures to console, victims to avenge? Do you understand?
Captain Nemo stopped at these last words, regretting perhaps that he had spoken so much, but I guessed that whatever the motive which had forced him to seek independence under the sea, it had left him still a man, that his heart still beat for the sufferings of humanity, and that his immense charity was for oppressed races as well as individuals. And I then understood for whom these millions were destined, which were forwarded by Captain Nemo when the Nautilus was cruising in the waters of Crete. End of chapter 9. And end of our reading for the evening. Well, how was today's reading? Did we enjoy? We got to do a lot. We did a lot. We fought sharks, transferred some underwater currents, got in and out of the boat, did a little water hunting. Now we're finding buried treasure. A little more intrigue, a little more insight into Captain Nemo, this enigmatic feature. Let's put a little pin of where we're at. Let's see where. All right, let me make a note of where we're at.
So the book picks up. I mean, like, there's been some boring parts of this book. There have been some technical parts of this book. But it's an adventure. A technical adventure. And we get some really fun parts. We get some really boring parts. A little bit of everything. Just because he wants to be so particular with everything. But I think we've gotten to experience quite a bit. You know, we've had some real fun here. Also, let me take off this part. We made 45 pages, which is about what we do. And again, it's not 45 book pages. It's 45, like document pages. Yeah. So we are cruising right along. Let's see. Let me pow. We have 87 pages left to go. And at a clip of 45 per night, that's pretty much darn. That's two more weeks. So you guys want to vote in the poll on the Discord for what the next book is going to be. We've got the 4 selections there. As Snooze Button told us, they are choices. I think they're decent choices. Think you guys will like them. Hope so. You can always suggest things for our choices. I did include 2 of the 3 that were not voted on for this time. I think we'll kind of do that, Do ones we voted on before. Whenever we start a new one. We will try to mix some shorter books as well as longer books. This is definitely... I believe Treasure Island took us 4 readings, which we went pretty quick on that one. We're on pace. This was number 4, so it's going to take us 6 for this one. A little bit thicker.